I don't have to do anything, right? Oh, nope. Juice. We got juice.
Give Dennis his coffee and his Bible. Cut him loose.
All right, so there's more, yeah, handouts. I'll need a couple more sips. Hopefully, I can still get rolling here in Hebrews chapter 1 without this coffee. But give me. What did I say?
No,
See, I'm already.
No, God, you need the coffee. Don't wait. Drink it. Hebrews.
Oh, there you go. You know that went past me before my coffee. All right, let's pray, and then we'll read the section of God's Word that we're going to study. Heavenly Father, thank you for the rain. We wished it was snow for the beauty of it, but we're thankful that in your providence you water the earth, you keep all things alive, and we're thankful for that. We pray, Father, as we undertake the text of Hebrews, that you would help us to apply these great truths to our lives and help us have just a deeper appreciation for your Son, who he is, and all that he has done for us, because he deserves the praise and the glory. Amen. All right, let's read. I guess maybe I'll make one comment. In going through even just these first 4 verses, there is so much that you could say about a lot of this stuff that I hope you take my meager 4 pages and use it as a springboard for your own study. There is so much here. It could take several months to go through all the details and that. So we're just really skimming the surface here, but I hope you use it as just again a springboard for your own study. So we plan to study the first 4 verses here in Hebrews 1. Next week we'll finish chapter 1. But let me go ahead and read this in the NASB. God, after he spoke long ago to the fathers and the prophets in many portions and in many ways, in these last days has spoken to us in his Son, whom he appointed heir of all things, through whom also he made the world. And he is the radiance of his glory and the exact representation of his nature, and upholds all things by the word of his power. When he had made purification of sins, he sat down at the right hand of the Majesty on high, having become as much better than the angels, as he has inherited a more excellent name than they. Okay? I usually don't go over the poor man's diagram. I just have that for your reference, but you'll notice that I do mark the main subject and the verb here, and in this one particular section, this is one Greek sentence that spans verses 1 through 4, and the subject is God, and the main action here, he has spoken. God has spoken. That is the main idea here in these first 4 verses. Actually, that's almost the main idea of the whole epistle, you know. And what's going to happen here is the authors is very first, right up front, going to compare how God spoke in the Old Testament to how he is speaking at the time that Hebrews was written. Okay, so again, this first section is one long Greek sentence, and both the NASB and NIV kind of, promote that subject up front, even though the Greek text doesn't start there. But what we have here, and I put the ordering of the translation up here in the poor man's diagram, the same order as the Greek text. So you'll say it, I start with in many portions and in many ways long ago. That's how the Greek text begins, though none of the English translations begin that way, okay? But just in this first section, you've got this really beautiful stylistic kind of wordplay that we'll talk about here, and the author here is again going to compare how he spoke in the Old Testament to how he is spoken today. I'll use that in quotes. I'll explain what that means. So right out of the gate, we've got two adverbs that are posted there, separated by the Greek word kai, which is and they are both these New Testament hapax legomenas, which, remember, that's spoken once. This is a Greek word that only appears right here in Hebrews. As a matter of fact, if you search the Septuagint, you won't find it there either. These are two words that don't appear anywhere else in all of the Bible. Okay? Lexicographers that study the words and all that kind of stuff, they kind of go back in history. How was this word used in the, Hellenistic period? Was there any, etymology that developed and stuff? Did it mean something, one day and all that kind of stuff? And what they've come up with is really what most of the translations are going to use. So that this first adverb, its basic meaning is in many parts. In many parts. It can have a temporal aspect in many times, in chunks, that kind of stuff, okay? But the basic idea here is that this first adverb that describes the revelation that God gives in the Old Testament, the best word that I could come up with is fragmentary, okay? Not that it's incomplete in some way for what he wanted to say, but it didn't all come at once, it came in pieces. It came in pieces, okay? Not only did it come in pieces, but it also came over a long period of time, okay? Those pieces are also have a temporal aspect to it, okay? He gave some revelation to one person and then kind of didn't say anything for a while, and then picked it up again a little bit later, added a little bit more, didn't say anything for a while. And that basically spanned about 600 years of Old Testament writing history, okay? So you got this idea that God spoke and then paused for a while. He spoke and paused. And each time he said something, he revealed something more about who he is and what his plan is, okay? And that's kind of highlights an important aspect of dispensationalism that we have. We understand that revelation is progressive. There is a progress to revelation that God gave, okay? He didn't give it all at once. And I have two corollary notes for that. These are free of charge, okay? This won't cost anything. My first note is, this is why it's beneficial for you to occasionally do a chronological read-through of the Bible. And you can get a Bible reading plan that goes through chronologically, okay? It is useful because that's how God gave the revelation. It's very helpful to understand that, to read it in its time sequence. Now, there may be some, doubt about when was Job written? Was it before this or that kind of stuff? That's okay. But for the most part, Bible scholars have ordered these things into a Bible reading plan, and it's really good to do. All right, that's the first thing. Second thing is this chronological aspect to the progress of Revelation. That's an important, I call it like a safety valve mechanism that will discourage us from fanciful interpretations from anything like that. For example, especially in the area of eschatology, okay, one of the things that we were careful to do with this principle in going through the book of Daniel, we never propelled ourselves forward into Matthew to find out what he said about it to understand what Daniel was saying. We stuck with Daniel, and if something was totally unclear, we didn't run with any particular interpretation of it. If there was something unclear or not precise, we just said, we're not sure about that, let's go on. But in the end, we came up with a solid framework for eschatology in the book of Daniel that now is a proper input to Matthew 24 and the rest of the eschatology of the New Testament. And what we insist is that New Testament stuff. I don't know why she does that. I don't know what I just said that sounded like, hey, Siri, I don't know. Anyway. But in bringing the framework of Daniel to Matthew, we insist that anything that Matthew has in his eschatology cannot change the framework that's already been established in Daniel. It could enhance it, it could clarify, it could even add some details that aren't there, but the basic framework can't change. Okay, Matthew has to build on that. Okay, that's the first adverb in many fragments in small time segments. The second one is used to describe how God spoke. It's in many ways, okay, in many kinds of ways, okay, and there's at least a couple of aspects to that. He certainly spoke to prophets, okay, literal prophets, Isaiah, Jeremiah, thus says the Lord kind of things. But at the same time, he also spoke to kings. David wrote the Psalms. Solomon wrote Proverbs, Ecclesiastes. He gave his revelation to different people, not just prophets, okay, in a strict sense. Not only that, but it came in different kinds of ways also. Sometimes that came through, direct word. Jeremiah, fond of that. The word of the Lord came to me, saying, and boom. Sometimes it came through visions. Isaiah had a couple of visions. Dreams. Dreams with interpretations, i.e. Nebuchadnezzar, okay? Gave the law to Moses. That was certainly revelatory. But the point is, there was diversity in how God chose to reveal himself, the different kinds of ways that he did, okay? And then there's a single word there that tells us, kind of sums up when did that revelation occur, okay? And it's a single word, palei. It means long ago or of old. And so you put that first phrase together, kind of has the meaning that long ago, in many ways, in many pieces, and in many kinds of ways, to many kinds of different people, okay, God spoke. And that indeed is actually the next word in verse 1, is you've got the subject there. Okay, long ago, in many ways, and many times, God has spoken. And we know that's the subject. It's in the right case. And that main verb, has spoken, actually doesn't occur till verse 2. But Greek, there's plenty of flexibility of where you put stuff. You tend to put things in certain positions more for emphasis, not function. Okay. And then you have a participle, having spoken. That's not the main verb. This is a kind of a subordinate clause here. Having spoken to them, and who were the them that he spoke to in uh, long ago? Well, the author tells us. It says in the NSB says he spoke to the fathers. Okay, the fathers. Now, when a Jew talks about the fathers, he's usually thinking about patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. But I think in this context, it's probably a little bit larger context. I think you could either mean all of the people that received some revelation in the New Testament. That's who God had spoke to. Maybe even generic the entire all of the Jews kind of thing. He spoke that to all of them, certainly. Now, why do we think that there's probably a larger meaning for fathers here? Well, there actually was a Greek term specifically, if you wanted to restrict the meaning to a real patriarch, and the word was, patriarch in Greek, pretty much. Okay, a couple of references there. Acts 2, says David is a patriarch, and later in Hebrews, Abraham is going to be mentioned. But I think a nice English word that captures the sense is forefathers, people that came before, and that was common. Now, who were the instruments of this revelation? Okay, it says the prophets. Okay, spoke to the fathers in the prophets, literally in the prophets. And again, here the term prophets here would probably be taken in a little bit more general way. If you look not the definition of a biblical prophet, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, but what is a prophet in definition? Well, that's someone who speaks for God and proclaims what God wants to make known about himself. And of course, David would fit that because he wrote the Psalms. So at least in this context, the prophets here, I think, includes all the people that God spoke to and contributed to the Old Testament and the Revelation there. Okay. One of the interesting things here is there's a very neat stylistic play on words. Many of these words begin with the Greek p, okay, pi. The two adverbs, that kind of stuff. The some of the participles here. The fathers, in Greek is begins with p. Prophets begins with p. Many other things like that. And so it's kind of in this first verse or so, you got one of those Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers kind of construct. Yeah, is that what it's called? All right, there you go. Alliteration. Learn something new every day. I play my dumb engineer card. I get out of jail free. Okay, very neat. A stylistic component that's wordy and flowing and makes that first introduction just a thing of beauty here. Okay. All right, let's pause there. Any comments or so from verse 1? The main point is God gave this revelation over a period of time in chunks. Okay. Yes. Yep. Makes a difference. Yep. In the Greek text, there's certainly not that possessive pronoun our, but I don't think that's
It kind of leans more to what you were saying about our father seems to be, like you said, all the fathers that have come.
Yeah. And not only that, but here it's going to say what whom did he speak via his son to us, right?
Yeah,
So
I think in the ESV translation philosophy, the R is not necessarily indicative of the possession of the Jews, sort of like from our line long
uh-huh.
ago. I think it's probably a readability thing.
Where does ESV fit on the you got NASB literal NIV dynamic equivalent? Is that in the middle, or I'm closer to
It's
literal,
closer
right?
than it. It's definitely literal, but they impart the function. It's not quite dynamic equivalence,
Okay.
but there is a place where here's where ESV really differs. In the NASB, the way the sentence is constructed, even though you've switched it to where it's completely in line with the Greek, there's still a lot of flow. The NSAB tries to keep the sort of
Okay.
original uh, grammatical flow, and the ESV tries to, without damaging any of the words or the sentence structure, but putting in a little more, so we don't
Okay.
sound like we're talking like
Sure.
Yoda.
Yeah.
It's
Right.
kind
Right.
of
Right.
more like a
Which is
straight
we're going to
flow.
get to here real quick here in
Yeah.
verse 2.
And
Yeah.
that's the
Yeah.
sort of thing.
Okay.
It's really a sentence flow is where
All
the
right.
ESV's philosophy
You know,
really.
I knew nothing about ESV. I don't use it. I know lots of folks use it, but I love NASB. But
Studying the NASB, and that's why I preach in the ESV. I feel like it just
okay.
really is.
All right. You might have a convert, but not right away. It'll take me a
I'm not
while.
trying to convert
It'll
you.
take me a while.
We have them all at the house.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
depends on what kind of mood I'm in.
I use a multiplicity of translations anyway. So, yeah. All right. Okay, verse 2. Verse 2 begins with a term in these last days. And right away, you see that the author here is immediately now going to draw a contrast between, long ago, he spoke in this way in these days, in these last days. And what could it mean? What does he mean by last days? Well, he could mean last days in the sense of ages. How many ages was it? Was Jewish eschatology separated into? Two: the present age and the messianic age to come. Um, I always found it interesting that the ancient rabbis, there was a lot of tension in their writings because they kind of argued amongst themselves, which of those ages does the Messiah appear in? Because we see it in both ages. Okay? And at that point, we as Christians insert a grin, right? We understand that there's a coming, his first coming, and a separation, and a second coming. Yes, he's present in both of those ages. Okay? They think he's just present in one. Okay? That kind of stuff. So, interesting stuff here. I think that in trying to figure out what does the last days mean, I think the demonstrative pronoun, though it's the near one, this, that, these, those, the demonstrative. This is something close. That over there, that's the singular. These close to you, plural. Those over there, far away. But he uses these. It's kind of he's saying, hey, these last days, the ones close, might be a euphemism for today, but recognize this today, meaning the time of the author of Hebrews, not today, 18th of January, 2026, right? He spoke, in that time, in his son, and we'll go there and see that, okay? Then we have the main verb, has spoken. It's an aorist tense that indicates completed action. I always review the first time, what is the basic difference between English verbs and Greek verbs? It's a concept called verbal aspect. And what that means is that the Greek verb, its predominant meaning is not when an action occurred, but what type of action it occurred. Now, it does convey when, but the primary meaning is the type of action. And in the aorist tense, that action is completed action. So when it says that God has spoken, that action is complete. There's nothing else that needs to be said here. It's completed action. He spoke it, he's done, and that's all we'll say about it. He's done speaking about that, right? All right. Yep. Yeah, yeah. I I see what you're saying. Yeah, I mean that action of speaking then and there is complete. Yeah, yeah, yeah. It doesn't mean there's something. I mean, certainly we would assume that we're going to get some new God speaking revelation in the millennium. I, for one, there's almost nothing about the eternal state. Well, I'd like to know a little bit more about that, right? I assume he's going to tell us that in the millennium, and we'll have a lot more revelation. Okay, that's presumption on my part, but all the dispensations have been like that. There's been new revelation given at the beginning of each dispensation. Okay. All right. Now, this next phrase here, I've typed the Greek out just so you can see it. This is an insanely interesting construct here, I think. He has spoken. That's the aorist verb here. God has spoken. You've got to us. This is us in the dative. So this is a direct object. But you have literally in Son, and there's some peculiarities about that we're going to have to deal with. How do we translate this in English? There's two things. One is there's the absence of a definite article. Okay, he has spoken to us in the Son. Okay, there's an absence of that. There are no textual variants here. This is the original text. He has, the thing is missing, and ordinarily in Greek grammar, that is allowed when you are trying to convey a qualitative aspect of the person or the thing that you're describing. Okay, so this is going to be cumbersome, but rather than a specific son with the definite article, the Son, here, it's the quality without the article of being a son that he's trying to emphasize. But in the English, we would normally say a son. So that wouldn't be definite. Not sure who that is. Throw this away. I could I could put my phone in silent mode. How do I put this watch in silent? All right. I'm going to wear my other watch, from now on. But, all right. Now, most translations are going to use the possessive pronoun. They're going to say his son here, right? You think you could do it with that? Oh, okay. Most are going to use his son. But the possessive pronoun also isn't in the text either, okay? Even though many translations would do, okay? Now, what the Greek is really trying to convey here is the qualitative aspect of sonness. Now, how do you say that in English? It's going to be difficult, going to be very difficult. I mean, if we were to literally translate it, we would say, he has spoken to us in Son. That's very cumbersome in English. That's poor English, right? Bad English. So most of the translators, they do what rarely happens in the translation process, is they give way to the theologian, because there's so many other passages that describe Jesus as the unique Son of God and his special relationship of Son to the Father, that inserting his Son here is making a theological decision, because we don't want to say a son. Okay, that'll make the Latter-day Saints happy. We're all gods, right? That kind of stuff. So the translator will give way to the theologian here, and with good reason. With good reason. It is difficult to convey what the Greek is trying to say in English. It's just very difficult here. Okay, Pastor, anything you want to add to that? It's a hard one, but yeah, it is. It's a hard one. All right, I think we got the basic gist here. What qualitative aspects are we talking about here of being a son? okay, and the Father. Well, we're going to get to that. It's coming up here. We now come upon a string of participles and stuff that highlight some of the things about the Son or about Sonness here. I think more about the Son. And that first thing is he appointed, whom he appointed, God the Father, who God appointed heir of all things. Okay, appointed, yes.
You know, there's one thing that's important to say just about what you just said. When you say give way to the theologian, though, what you're saying is not that we have a theology and that we're giving way to that theology. We're giving way to the theology of the text, the
Right.
greater text.
Right.
So it's not like we are superimposing. Hey, we're
Right. It's not
It's
superimposing.
not superimposing.
It's
based
choosing.
Based
Yeah.
on the other sentences
Yeah.
in this particular part. It is obvious
Yeah.
what this should
Yeah.
be signifying.
Good point. Good point. Yeah. Yeah.
We all knew what you were talking about.
Yeah. Yeah. Yep. All right. So the concept of being made an heir, that's a distinctly Jewish, concept there. A Jew reading Hebrews would certainly understand that illustration that he's using as an heir here. And what is that? Well, usually a firstborn son, would eventually be lord over his father's property, possessions. He would administer and rule over the affairs of that household. And here he's telling us, the author is telling us that God the Father has appointed, this is another aorist, so completed action, the Son to be the heir, but not just over, some things related to some inheritance and stuff as a Jew would, but he's heir over all things. All things. Okay? And what does that demonstrate? If he is the Lord over all things, that's lordship, man. That's lordship over everything, not just some things that deal with, the possession of some inheritance. Okay, this is speaking to his rulership and his lordship. He is the heir of all things. Okay, through whom also he made the world. Okay, not only, has the Son been made heir of all things, one of those pieces of all things includes the piece of the physical world, right? That's part of all, the thing that was created. He was involved in its creation, okay, in its creation. All translations are going to say he made the world, okay? The literal word there is the ages. He made the ages, and of course, that certainly can be a reference to time. Okay, not only did he make the whole physical world, but he made the ages that govern that world, and the world exists in those ages and stuff. Time itself, yes, time itself is a construct of creation. Yeah. Now, we're gonna take the time to look at Colossians in just a little bit. But why is he worthy to be heir of all things? He created them. He created them all too. Right. All right. Getting to some more interesting things here in verse 3. It begins with, he is the radiance of his glory and the exact representation of his nature. Okay, the word that NASB translates radiance, that's another hapax legomena in Hebrews. This is a single occurrence. Yes. Uh-huh. I think it may be, and I'm not sure. I'd have to look at that, but it may be that just in some contexts, that particular that particular word had become an idiom for the world, all the created world. Okay, um, like the word that we use, forever, usually is, the ages of ages. Lots of stuff. That's an idiom that we use, and we put forever there. It may just be an idiom. Um, okay, the word here, it means radiance or splendor or brilliance. And interesting in looking at some of the lexical data, and it's scant because this is a single occurrence, a Greek term in the New Testament. There is an active sense and a passive sense that we can use this term radiance. And as an illustration, I kind of use it as is the radiance that's being mentioned here of Jesus. Is it an active radiance like the light from the sun? Or is it a passive radiance like the light from the moon, which is reflected by the sun? Okay, I think either is possible here, but I lean towards the first one. Why? I go back just one little nitpicky thing that lands me there, and that's the transfiguration. And what was the transfiguration? Okay, Jesus was transfigured. What did the disciples do almost right away? Hey, let's build you a tabernacle. Why? Because they recognized that they were seeing the Shekinah glory of God, and it needed to be, whatever, contained in a tabernacle or something somewhere. So they were seeing that Shekinah glory, and the reason I think that should be in the active sense here is that the text in Matthew 17:2 actually says his face shone like the sun. That's all I got. That's my only reason for being on the active side of this. I got no other juice there. So, yeah, right. So my paraphrase, the Dennis paraphrase here is, he radiates the Shekinah glory of God. That would be my own paraphrase for this particular piece, the radiance of his glory. Now, the next piece of it is another single occurrence in the word in the Greek text, the exact representation of his nature. And this one's a little interesting because this has some etymology to it. This has a meaning, and its initial, long ago Hellenistic days, and it just gradually morphed into a different meaning. It originally meant the tool used for engraving, and over years and years, it became the thing that was created from that engraving. But in the times of the New Testament, it seems to mean an exact reproduction in every detail. That was the meaning of that particular noun here. It was an exact representation. So the question is, what is the Son an exact representation or impression of? Well, it says the exact representation of his nature. And what kind of nature does God the Father possess? Divine. He possesses a divine nature. All right. And what is a divine nature? It's the attributes such as omnipotence, omniscience, yada, 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 all of those things that uniquely separate God from everything else. Okay. We don't have that. Animals don't have that. But what the text is telling us is the Son does. He has the exact same nature, the perfect reproduction as God the Father, which is a divine nature here. Okay? I think there's a clear statement of divinity here, right? The only clearer one, I think, is in Colossians 2:9. I like the NASB because it says, "For in him all the fullness of deity dwells in bodily form." Yes, Lisa.
So when I was explaining the Trinity to the kids, I used this verse,
Oh, yeah?
and I used a stamp.
Mm-hmm.
So you stamp that, just a little kid stamp, you put it in the ink, and it
Yeah.
is the exact picture on the paper.
That
It
is
was
the
like an
imagery.
animal, like
Yeah.
a tiger or
Yep.
something.
That's the imagery here.
So I used that to explain
Yeah.
that verse.
Yeah. That's good.
So,
Neat. Okay. The next phrase. He upholds all things by the word of his power. Okay. The word there for upholds means to bear or carry it, keep it from falling apart. What is it that he upholds? All things, right? All things. He upholds all things. I think the exact same concept is conveyed in the Colossians passage. I want to go ahead and scooch over there because you've got some interesting concepts here in the Colossians passage that just happen to be here in these first couple of verses of Hebrews. And so if we start, I like to start in verse 14 because we're going to have that in the next blurb here in Hebrews. It said, we have redemption, the forgiveness of sins. It says, he is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. Okay, we're going to touch that in Hebrews too. For by him all things were created, both in the heavens and on the earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities. All things have been created through him and for him, and he is before all things, and in him all things hold together. Okay? That's exactly the same theology that's conveyed here in Colossians. Okay, this Hebrews terms and this kind of stuff, Colossians, but come on, that theology is so disparate. Paul couldn't have written this, right? Couldn't have written Hebrews. How is that possible? It's right there. I mean, all of these things are right there. Oh, Paul could not have written it. Drives me up the wall. All right. He'd made purification of sins. Okay, it's a participle phrase, literally having made purification. It'd be an aorist participle there, so completed action. And this would be probably a temporal use of a participle. So whether the NASB says when he had made purification, or the NIV says after he had made purification, he sat down. Okay, that is the concept here. So this purification, that's a pretty priestly term. A priest certainly understood what purification and cleansing was about. It may lend some credence that this was written to not just Jews, believing Jews, but possibly priests. Okay, the purification or cleansing was from what? Okay, it's from sin, right? The guilt of sin. And a priest certainly would be very familiar with offering cleansings and stuff for that kind of stuff. Where did this purification for a Jew take place? At the temple, right? Through some ritual, right? No doubt that the author of Hebrews is going to revisit that stuff in much greater detail later on. The ritual aspects and the location and sanctuary and stuff. Okay. Now, most of the translations at this point are going to make a new, sentence, but in the Greek it continues along with the relative pronoun. He sat down. Again, it's in the aorist tense. It's completed action, and is related to his purification. Acts and stuff. That's complete. And where did he sit after that? after the completion of that purification, the text says, at the right of majesty on high. That's a fancy way of saying what? The right hand of the Father, right? The right hand of the Father. He's clearly seated at the right hand of the Father. And this is going to be an allusion to Psalm 110, the messianic fulfillment of Psalm 110. The author is going to cite that later on in this first chapter and use that as a demonstration that Jesus is that Son that's seated at the right hand. Okay? Now, where would we go to actually prove that, yes, Jesus is currently at the right hand of the Father? Always just think the Church of Laodicea, okay, in Revelation 3. If you go to the end of that, okay, Jesus, that last admonition, he says, to him who overcomes, I will grant to sit with me on my throne as I overcame and sat on my Father's throne. That first sat is future tense. The second sat, as I sat, is the aorist tense. Okay, that's where he is. Okay, and what is the significance of sitting down at the right hand of the Father? What did it mean for a king to allow, say, a visiting king to sit on his right hand? It was an acknowledgement that there was equal honor and equal authority there. Okay, at least while the visitor's sitting on the throne, he can't sell the palace and that kind of stuff, right? So the illustration certainly isn't perfect there. But the point is, sitting on the right hand, all the authority and lordship of God the Father, at Jesus sitting at his right hand. Okay. Yes. Oh.
It also, like, what speaks to me of this too is, it's like, after making purification for sins, which we know as he died on the cross for
Mm-hmm.
us and he's cleansed the sins, he sat down,
Mm-hmm.
meaning goes back to it is finished. You know,
Yeah.
when you do something and you sit down, whether it's speaking or whatever, and you sit down, it's finished, and it brings back to that peace.
That is true. Yeah, it is. It's finished. But where he sat down brings more significance to the finished work. Yeah. That's right. He stood up, and you're right. Good point. And because it was never over, right? He had to come back the next day and do it again. And once a year, the chief priest would go in the Holy of Holies on the Day of Atonement. Every year he had to do it again. And that is something that that's one of the main arguments that the author of Hebrews is going to make later on, is that, look, these priests do it every single day. Jesus did it once. And so we'll definitely hit that later on. But that's true. None of the priests ever sat down after they did something. Yes. Yeah. Right. We'll each get a turn, right? For a day. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I take the text at its, at its literal meaning, but man, I just can't process that. That's a tough
I
one.
didn't want to run down a rabbit trail earlier,
Yeah.
but when you were talking about the transfiguration, when you look at the word that's used in Hebrews 12:2, be transformed is the same exact Greek word. It means to be transfigured. And so it's not like
Romans 12? Romans 12. Yeah, yeah.
Hebrews
Yeah.
12. Romans
Yeah.
12.
Yeah. Okay.
Hebrews 12.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting.
But it's the same Greek word that you have, at least the rooting of it, but it's the same Greek word. Look it up. And so obviously that's not saying, it doesn't say that we are the exact imprint of God in the same way the Son is, but it is saying something pretty dramatic there.
Yeah.
Like the transfiguration of Christ, where they saw his glory, that in our glorification, we will be transformed. And of course, it's positionally here,
Yeah.
progressive sanctification, but ultimately glorified. That's pretty exciting.
We'll have a glorified body too. Cool. I like that. My knees won't hurt. All right. Let's finish it up here. We got 5 minutes. Hopefully, I can get through this. Now, starting in verse 4, you can almost stop your analysis there of Hebrews, the first couple of verses, at 3. But 4, it kind of introduces a topic that he's going to spend the rest of chapter 1 on and some of chapter 2 on. And that he's going to begin to compare this son, the Lord Jesus, with the first of the 3 Jewish pillars that Hebrews addresses: angels, Moses, and the sacrificial system and stuff. He's going to now talk about how the son is better than the angels. Okay, the participle that's used here. Throw this watch away. Yeah,
That's your trigger word.
is it? Every time I say participle, that doesn't sound like "Hey Siri" at all, though, does it? I don't know. Yeah. So the participle used here is the wording here is having become as much better than the angels, and in our context here, that would involve, okay, when did that happen? It happened after he made purification for sins, and he was exalted, sitting on the right hand of the Father. Okay, but since the author uses an aorist here, okay, it might appear to someone that having become much better than an angel, it may appear that someone could say, oh, there must have been a time when he was not better than the angels. And we want to briefly talk about that. The question is the author here trying to imply that there was a time when Jesus was not greater than the angels? Shocking. Yes, in some small sense, in a sense. Okay. While Jesus is and always has been greater than the angels, okay, and a theologian would use a preface term, in the realm of his deity. Okay, he has always been greater because he created them. They were created for him. He sustains them just like he sustains us. In the realm of his deity, he always has been greater than the angels, okay? But in the realm of his humanity, when he took on human flesh and became a man on our behalf and eventually went to the cross to die, in that sense, the act of taking on humanity, that's the sense in which for a little while he became lower than the angels.
Subtraction by addition.
Yeah, only in the realm of his humanity. And of course, the text will go on to, it says, having become much better than the angels now, after his completed work and his exaltation, now, even in his humanity, he is greater than the angels. Okay, and that, I think, is what the author, in using the aorist, is trying to imply here. Okay, I think you're going to have the same thing in a Psalm 8 quotation that's going to come up here. It's made lower than the angels for a little while. But also, you've got this whole theology that Paul develops in Philippians chapter 2, where the basic content is he emptied himself and took on human flesh for our behalf. Okay? Yeah, the kenosis, right? And again, that theology is so disparate from, Hebrews. He couldn't have written Hebrews, right? It's just, you see it in there so plain. I don't know why that happens. Anyway, He has inherited a more excellent name than they. Than they, meaning the angels. As a result of that exaltation, he has inherited a more excellent name than they. Interesting. A lot of times, Greek order, putting a Greek word in a certain place is for emphasis. The word name here is at the very end of this big, long Greek sentence here. The question is, what name are we talking about here? And there's a couple of different things that people have proposed. Some say just Jesus, his name, or Lord Jesus, or the Christ, that kind of stuff. Some would say the name that nobody else knows that's mentioned in Revelation 19 at his second coming. There's a name that only he knows, and they're saying, okay, maybe it's that name. I think, each of those is possible. I'm not going to get hung up on which one, but I think given that the text in verse 5 is going right to, which of the angels did he ever say, you're my son? Okay. I think the name here is just son. And it may point back to the inarticulate use of son up there in verse 2. So I opt for son, but that's neither here nor there. So, just because that's where it's going, how the Son is greater than the angels. So that's my choice. All right, let's summarize real quick, and then we'll take some comments and questions. Okay, main point of this first long Greek sentence, and likely a foreshadowing of the rest of this whole epistle, is a contrast between how God spoke in the past, he did it in parts through many prophets, now to how he has spoken in these last days. He's given us a complete revelation in the person of his Son, and his Son is greater than the angels, and that's because of his deity, his completed work, and the name that he's been given. And the author of Hebrews is going to continue to develop this comparison as the book goes along. And so next week, it's interesting that we'll just go ahead and go through and unpack these remaining Old Testament quotations. There are 7 of them from different parts of the Old Testament, and each one of them is saying something about the Son in its comparison to the angels. So, all right. Questions, comments, snide remarks from wife? Yes, ma'am. Aorist means that the action of the verb is completed. Okay, so it's a past tense, but the work is complete. So a participle, that's an ing verb in English. We would say having sat down. Having sat down. So there's no process to the sitting. It's a point action that's complete. Does that make sense? Okay. Yep.
Well done.
Yep. Dynamic. Okay, here's my paraphrase of it. I could go look up a strict definition, but essentially take the literal text and translate it in today's vernacular, without disrupting the meaning too badly. So the example I use is, a denarius, a day's wages, substituted a day's wage, that kind of stuff, just to make it more readable.
You have to use some sort of explanation.
Yeah.
Because especially when there's phrases that are used, idioms and things of this
Yeah.
nature.
Yeah.
In Luke, where it says that Mary was pregnant, it says that her belly was full.
Right. Yeah. It wasn't
from.
from the pizza she ate.
It would be like me saying, David, my wife, or Dennis, my wife has a bun in the oven. You
Right.
would say, oh, well, congratulations.
Yes.
And so, just one distinction, though, about dynamic equivalence. I don't want to imply that ESV had that. So the NIV is a thought-for-thought translation. It literally takes a thought and translates the
Yeah.
thought NSAV is super concentrated on words and sentences as
Right.
much as possible.
Yeah.
The ESV is very focused on words, but takes a little more care to try to split the sentence around where it reads better.
Okay,
So I would
in
say-
English.
Yes,
Yeah,
in English. So
Okay.
I'd say NSAV, the best Bible to study words and it's the best study Bible you could have. The ESV is going to read a little better and
Yeah.
be very, very literal. And then the NIV is a thought-for-thought translation that reads
Yeah.
well,
Yeah.
but you could never study out of it.
It breaks up like one of the measures that I always go. Okay, here's a new translation. I'm going right to Ephesians 1:3-14. Okay, how many sentences has it broken up this one huge long Greek sentence? Okay, NAS is like 2 or 3 sentences. NIV is like I don't know 8 or 9 sentences. It's just a ridiculous amount, and a lot of times that's a disadvantage because it's disrupting the real flow of what's trying to be said. Okay, I personally used NIV to read to my children when they were young and could understand it because it does read nice. I also like it in the Old Testament. It just sounds nice in the Old Testament. But I agree. If you're gonna use NIV in any study, you're gonna do that alongside a literal translation of some kind. NAS, King James. Yeah. Yep.
I'm convinced, though, that every translation has to use a little bit of dynamic equivalent because you have to use that to take from the Greek and put sometimes a couple words in English. Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
There's more. I don't want to get into a translation class here, but dynamic equivalence is a definition of a specific way that's done. Though
Mm-hmm.
there are a couple other methods that's similar to doing what you're saying, but it's not necessarily using the same principles that dynamic equivalence uses.
And there's another category way over here called paraphrase. And usually,
Massage.
the message, yeah,
I mean, the message.
the message. And you're not going to use that to study.
Or for anything.
I think so. Yeah, you can make a good argument. You're not going to use that for anything. However,
I'm kidding you.
good news for modern man is a paraphrase. That paraphrase was instrumental in my coming to Christ.
That's why I'm kidding.
Okay? Yeah. 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 Exactly.